Hippocrates develops a theory of the four humours which run the body, and if one of them becomes out of balance, you become ill.
Is the grimace shake one of the four humours, man?
Jenna, I'm glad you're helping out, but it's actually blood, phlegm, yellow bile and black bile. And the purging of these excess humours was supposed to heal your body.
When illnesses were being cured, didn't he also stress the importance of rational means and careful observation?
That's right, Ari, thanks for the reminder. And the fact these principles are still used by doctors today who follow the Hippocratic Oath.
Didn't all that yapping in the Hippocratic collection also prove useful?
Oh, absolutely. It contained detailed lists of symptoms and treatments which could be used to train doctors.
I swear there was a bozo who used Hippocrates to make another theory.
Yeah, let's move on to Galen. Galen used Hippocrates' findings to create his theory, the theory of opposites, which linked the seasons of the year to the treatments which could be used to cure imbalances. For example, if you had phlegm, which is something cold, it is something wintry, and you would treat it with hot pepper, which is the opposite of that. And if you feel hard about wanting to smash your exams, well, guess what? I've got something to upgrade your workspace for you. My favorite affiliate flashcards, lamps, Kindle books, all down below in the affiliate links. Cut. And guess what? Speaking of cuts, Galen encouraged dissection. He did it on animals though, such as his dissection of apes. And through his pig experiment, for example, he proved that the brain and not the heart controlled speech, and that arteries carry blood around the body. Now the problem with him was that his ideas were strictly defended by the church, and so that means that they lasted for over 1,000 years being taught in medical schools, which actually slowed down progress. Now moving on to some of the Muslim world, we have of course Avicenna, big figure here. He kept ideas of Hippocrates and Galen alive after the fall of the Roman Empire, combined their ideas in his 1 million word textbook Canon of Medicine, 1025, should remember that day, listed medical properties of 760 drugs, discussed obesity and anorexia.
Wasn't the book widely used until like the 17th century?
That's right, it became the standard medical textbook to teach Western doctors for hundreds of years. And in fact, was actually encouraged by Islam because dissections were encouraged. For every disease, Allah has given a cure. That was the principle that many Muslim doctors went by. Razi was also highly influential. He was one of the first to notice differences between smallpox and measles. He criticized some of Galen's findings, including his theory of opposite. And actually, when he wrote over 150 books, one of them was called Doubts About Galen. Now, he importantly promoted ethical medicine in the sense that he believed that the doctor's aim was to do good even to our enemies, and that was very ahead of his time. Now, meanwhile, Ibn al-Nafis disproved Galen's theory on the heart by investigating pulmonary and coronary circulation. In his book Al-Mujas, he also provided the difference between kidney and bladder stone.
His ideas were so based, why didn't they spread well?
Well, see, the problem was he was just too far ahead of his time. Now, moving back to Europe, we've got Mondino, who carried out public dissections and researched anatomy as well, publishing Anatomia in 1316. Now, although he was a follower of Galen, he detached from some of his ideas and emphasized that anatomy of animals differed from that of humans. And giving details of descriptions of the brain and the pancreas, his work was taught in universities for over 250 years, and he even influenced Da Vinci. Now, next, on to Frugadi.
Did you just say Skibidi, as in the toilet guy?
No, Roger Frugadi, another medieval Italian surgeon. In 1180, he wrote The Influential Practice of Surgery. He sported a systemic but specific approach towards cures and warned against trepanning. And this because he believed nerves could be damaged permanently. Certainly a progressive approach towards science. And next we have one of the most famous British medieval surgeons, John of Ardern, well known for his 50% success rate, which, believe it or not, actually was very impressive at the time. He wrote Practica as his magnus opus in 1376, which contained illustrations of its instruments and operations. Now, he was famous for treating successfully anal abscesses, which soldiers got from being on horseback for long periods of time during wars such as the Crusade. And for his surgery, he used opium and henbane to dull pain, which made surgery more pleasant. Now next we have our first Renaissance guy, Andreas Vesalius, who carried out many dissections but of human bodies and promoted his shocking find. And unsurprisingly, those defied Galen's because they were based on actual humans and not apes or other animals.
For example, Vesalius proved the human jaw has one bone rather than two like apes, so they would mew differently.
That's right, and he detailed it all in his 1543 masterpiece Fabrica, which showed those detailed descriptions of human organs and organ systems. Now luckily for him, the invention of the printing press in 1474 and the translation of books meant that his work spread around Europe quicker and inspired many English surgeons. And in fact, if we have a look at his broader impact, it certainly promoted an innovative approach towards surgery and anatomy. He influenced other anatomists like Colombo with his Fabrica, which led to developments and understanding of the heartbeat, which in turn, if we look down the course, helped Harvey. It meant that people like Fallopius suggested even less traditionalism in science and surgery, and it was backed up by the fact that Vesalius defended his findings. He was forced out of the University of Padua, but became a doctor for Spanish Emperor Charles V, which showed his resilience. Now, he was actually used by barber surgeons after Thomas Geminus copied his work and published Compendiosa in 1545, and other plagiarisms like Valverde's book also spread his work. Now, although that's not good for the author in the modern day, actually it meant that knowledge was distributed quicker, and his work in fact is still useful for physiotherapy and osteotherapy today. Next we're moving on to Ambrose Paré from France, who was famous for experimenting and testing different surgical methods, and his main innovation actually came from the Battle of Milan in 1536, when he used a mix of rose oil, egg white and turpentine to treat wounds instead of cauterization, which worked. He also promoted the use of ligatures and amputation, which was Galen's idea, but the problem is that the wound would get infected back in those days. He designed crow's beak to be able to halt bleeding, and he actually used and translated Vesalius' anatomical knowledge from Latin to French in his books, such as works on surgery from 1575. Now, books spread his knowledge as well. He inspired many surgeons such as William Close, which is the surgeon of Elizabeth I. And why is he significant in the long term? Well, he developed prosthetics, ligatures, and stitches, which are all still used in modern surgery. Another big Renaissance man, William Harvey, this one now from England, he disproved Galen's theory that blood is produced in the liver and burnt as fuel, using Colombo's discovery that blood moves along veins and arteries, and Fabricius's findings proving that veins have valves. By 1616, he was able to prove blood circulation.
After 12 years of mathematical calculation and biological investigations, he finally published that book, called On the Motion of the Gyat.
Nearly there, Jenna. It's On the Motion of the Heart, 1628, in which he stated that blood was pumped around the body by the heart. Now, his problem was he could not explain why this occurred, and that's why people called him a quack, an accountant, but nevertheless, he was still significant in the long run too. Not only because he was right, but because it led to us being able to pulse check, do blood transfusions by 1901, and much more. Thomas Sydenham, who was famous for careful observation and maintenance of medical records. Now, he published Observations Medicae, 1676, funnily enough, perhaps it'll be easy to remember now, and his studies at Oxford were sadly disrupted by the English Civil Wars. However, he kept going and made some innovations. He was the first to describe scarlet fever, treated iron-deficient anemia with iron, and introduced laudanum, a form of opium, into medical practice. Also in a similar era was Nicholas Culpeper, who published Complete Herbal in 1653 and described the medical use of foxglove. Now, he recommended meeting patients in person instead of relying on things like urine, which you'd think smart nowadays, but remember, it's the history of medicine. People are a bit cuckoo back in the day. And he translated medical works into English and actually helped the poor to get treated. We have the first Enlightenment figure, John Hunter, who promoted scientific approach towards surgery and taught thousands of young surgeons. For example, Edward Jenner, which we will see in a sec. Now, he wrote many books based on his experimentation and practical knowledge. For example, The Natural History of Teeth, 1771, on Venereal Disease, 1784, and dissected many human bodies, keeping over 3,000 anatomical specimens of animals and humans to study biological processes.
We love that. It's hella useful cause they were studied after his death, and the Hunterian Museum was founded in London thanks to his efforts.
That's true, yeah. And moving on to Edward Jenner, the inventor of vaccines. Now, he did it partly thanks to overhearing milkmaids saying that they are immune to smallpox because they've had cowpox. If you're doing a question on chance or luck, this might be a nice story to bring up. Now, he experimented on a boy in 1796 to test this principle, and it worked. After testing it 16 times over several weeks, he published his findings in a book, Causes and Effects of Smallpox, in 1798. Now, luckily, he did not patent his discovery, which means it could be used all over the world. Now, of course, as always, received plenty of opposition. Illness was God's punishment, people said, and that means it shouldn't be prevented. Doctors profited from inoculation, and rich city doctors like William Woodville laughed at the northerner. Now, some fortune eventually came Jenner's way. The royal family endorsed him. Parliament gave him a £10,000 grant in 1802, and vaccination was actually made compulsory for smallpox in 1853. And as a result of his work, in 1979, smallpox was eradicated. And of course, needless to say, many future vaccines were influenced, and in fact we'll discuss some of these in just a few minutes. Now onto some Victorian public health. We have Edwin Chadwick, who set up an inquiry into living conditions and health of the poor in Britain. He produced a report on the sanitary conditions of the working populations in 1842, where he pushed for clean water, good sewage system, and a proper public health system all across the country. With 10,000 copies of the report handed out to politicians and journalists, and over 20,000 sold to the public, it had a massive impact. And he said in it that overcrowded conditions cause disease and the rich should be taxed to help the poor.
In this way, he helped pass the 1848 Public Health Act, W.
Indeed, William Farr also helped public health a lot. He worked for the Register of Births, Deaths, and Marriages. He introduced death certificates in the 1840s, which had to be signed by a qualified doctor giving the cause of death. And combining with Chadwick's report, his work helped provide a link between disease and foul water system. Back to a little bit of surgery, we have James Simpson, who discovered chloroform in 1847, which allowed surgeons to do more complex procedures as an effective painkiller. Now, how did this happen? Again, a little bit of chance. Simpson and his friends were experimenting with different substances. Someone knocked over a bottle of chloroform, and his wife found later everyone unconscious. Now, of course, as every time he experienced opposition, people rejected anesthetic use for childbirth, as it was God's punishment to the woman. Military surgeons used to fast and efficient surgeries said it was the duties during the Crimean War, for example, 1853 to 1856. But luckily, once again, there was a royal endorsement. Queen Victoria, during childbirth, Prince Leopold said that it was a soothing, quietening, and a delightful experience with chloroform. Now, despite this progress, it actually was followed by a dark period of surgery in the 1850s. This is because despite Snow's work, there were increasing deaths due to infections. And speaking of John Snow, this was the man that proved cholera was a waterborne disease during an 1854 outbreak. He found that removing the handle from a water pump caused the deaths of people on a street to stop. And later it was found that that is because that water supply, surprise surprise, was contaminated. And he also invented a chloroform inhaler and worked out safe dosages for it.
Wow, helping Simpson and doing lots of other great work. Thank you. Next.
Joseph Bazalgette's key contribution was drawing up plans for the London sewage system in 1855. Following the Great Stink of 1858, Parliament gave the Metropolitan Board of Works £3 million to build a network. And by 1866, 83 miles of sewers were built, which removed 420 gallons of waste per day. And once the system became functioning, London's appearance improved and cholera never returned. Now let's get to the big guys. Louis Pasteur, the germ theory, came up with it in 1861 after proving through a series of scientific experiments that different microbes in the air cause disease and decay with his swan neck flask. Now, he didn't use it for humans at first, but eventually he applied it to medicine and suggested that germs cause disease and not the other way around as other people thought. He created vaccines with this knowledge, one for chicken cholera in 1879, one for the anthrax vaccine in 1881, and one for the rabies vaccine in 1882. Even in his public anthrax experiment, he proved the effectiveness on sheep, even though Koch thought that it was sloppy science, as he called it. Now, once again, there was an element of luck in all this research. For example, when a bacterial solution was left open over the summer holidays, his assistant Chamberlain injected the weakened form into the chicken and made the chickens immunized, which led to that 1879 vaccine. Throughout all of this, nationalism accelerated efforts. During the Franco-Prussian War 1870 to 1871, the governments of Germany and France funded them and offered them research teams. And by the 1880s, his work was accepted in Britain, with the likes of John Tyndall promoting. And eventually, this of course led to new treatments and aseptic surgery. And we'll look into how that happened now. But first, let's take a look at antiseptic surgery, which was the work of Joseph Lister. Now remember the 50% mortality rate of surgery? Well, he wanted to fight infection and reduce that rate radically. And guess what? He managed to do it. In 1865, he wrapped a boy's wounded leg with bandages soaked in carbolic acid using Pasteur's knowledge of microbes, and the boy's healed. And he, using that finding, began cleaning all wounds, equipment and bandages in the solution. By 1867, he radically reduced sepsis cases, which is the infection of the blood, and the death rate during amputation, which fell from 45.7% to just 15%. And his ideas were quickly accepted in the USA and Germany, but faced some resistance in Britain. Why is that? Well, because carbolic spray cracked surgeons' skin. Opposition came from critics like Bastian, who believed in spontaneous generation, that disease caused germs and not the other way around. And surgery was made slower and more expensive, so of course people didn't like that. And this was a major building block for Robert Koch, who's then used this to develop aseptic surgery, which we will go on to now. Koch developed Pasteur's work and used it to gain more knowledge on bacteria. With his anthrax experiments, he injected 20 generations of mice with the virus to prove that the pathogen stays the same. And he identified tuberculosis, cholera, and other bacterial pathogens. For TB, it was 82. Cholera, it was 83. Obviously to 19th century here talking about. And he actually stained bacteria to see them better too.
In 1879, he aseptic maxed and found that steam killed microbes better than that mid-carbolic acid.
That's right, he brought us aseptic surgery, which is what we were looking for. And by 1894, surgeons wore sterilized rubber gloves. And his work spread once again. The man, Tyndall, in 1876 gave lectures on the anthrax experiment. Lister's deputy, Cheney, actually translated Koch's work into English in 1879. And this all helped the identification of other diseases and allowed diseases to be treated. For example, the plague was identified in 1894, and his assistant Bering actually cured diphtheria in 1891. Now this leads on nicely to magic bullets, and of course Paul Ehrlich. The conversation wouldn't be the same without him. He is part of Koch's research team, and he theorized that if chemicals can stain bacteria, they can kill them too. And in 1909, he discovered the famous Salvarsan 606, after 606 attempts, which could treat syphilis, and he received the Nobel Prize for Medicine in 1908 during his hard work. By 1914, he discovered other bullets, methyl blue for malaria, for example, trypan red for sleeping sickness. And what's the long-term significance of this? Well, of course, it meant that the pharmaceutical industry, big pharma, the development of it was kick-started, and more magic bullets were discovered in the future. For example, Damask Prontazil in 1932 to cure pneumonia. Now let's chat a little bit about World War I. We've got Harold Gillies, who published The Plastic Surgery of the Face in 1920. And he treated 5,000 men by 1921, with many coming back with shrapnel wounds, which luckily Gillies used graft to treat.
Plastic surgery sounds horrible and painful. Who would use that on their body? Voluntarily?
Haha, nice one, Kim, but this is the wrong video. Go back to doing the how useful question from the course, which you can check out after this video. Now a classic, let's do a little bit of Fleming. Alexander Fleming discovered and experimented with penicillin, as we all know. In 1928, he left petri dishes of bacteria open while he was on holiday. And when he came back, he found that in places where mold grew, bacteria actually disappeared. Another, again, so cliche, another little bit of luck. He experimented with a substance that he extracted from the mold. What did he find? And what did he note down? He made a list of the bacteria it killed, and he treated another scientist's eye infection with it. Now, he couldn't extract it in large quantities. Fine. He didn't carry out systemic tests on animals with it. And this meant that he actually abandoned his research. However, as we'll find out with the next individuals, penicillin, and it led to the development of other antibiotics. For example, tetracycline for skin infections in 1953. Now, what were the people that made this all happen? Had Florey and Ernst chain. They mass-produced penicillin. Firstly, they read Fleming's findings in 1938 and began their own research. Asked for government funding, but they were given just £25. This meant that they tested it on mice and then grew it using hundreds of hospital bedpans, you know, a little bit of DIY 5-minute crafts, right? And they proved it worked. They tested it on PC Alexander and recovered until they ran out the drug. Now, during World War II, they persuaded the American government to fund 4 drug companies, and an $80 million loan was provided in the end.
12 to 15% of wounded Allied soldiers would have died without penicillin. Funding it was worth the Fanum taxes.
I couldn't agree more, Ari. And without further ado, let's do a little bit of bonus individuals to get you that grade 9. Who have we got? Let's have a little look at a few 20th century people. We've got Mary Curie. During World War I, she developed a portable X-ray machine that could be used during the war.
Spanish surgeon Fidel Pages pioneered epidural anesthesia, which is now used in major surgeries like childbirth.
Archibald Muckendo used drugs such as penicillin to prevent infection while treating pilots with horrible facial injuries.
When William Greatbatch in 1956 was working on an oscillator to record heart sounds, he accidentally installed the wrong resistor. This created an electric pulse which was used to make an artificial pacemaker. So switching my positions for you ended up helping people with irregular heart rhythms.
And finally, Roy Kahn in 1970 developed cyclosporine, which prevented organ transplant rejection. And congratulations, you made it to the end. Have a nice day. Go get that grade 9. Subscribe and like.